Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. A vast majority of India's workforce is informally employed. Those who work outside of formal establishments in unincorporated private enterprises and mostly without any social security benefit. A new research now finds that Modi 1.0's reforms and policies have managed to push ahead with the greater formalization of the country's workforce. More than 7 million jobs have been formalized between 2015 and 2018, a study commissioned by the Indian Staffing Federation stated. The policies that contributed to formalization include the introduction of the Goods and Services Tax, demonetization, EPF reforms, Skill India initiatives, fixed-term contract reform, as well as the maternity benefit reform. These reforms could contribute to even more of India's workforce transitioning to the formal going ahead. The study projects that about 11 million more jobs will move to the formal sector between 2018 and 2021. Of the 7 million jobs that shifted to the formal sector in 2015-18, EPF reforms contributed 18.1%, ESIC 17.68%, GST 15.32%, Skill India initiatives 13.10%, demonetization 12.35%, maternity reforms 11.83% and fixed-term contract 11.56%. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a closer look at the informal sector. Joining me on the program today are Aman Agarwal, Director, Indian Institute of Finance, Ajay Dua, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and Yatish Rajawat, Senior Journalist. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Dua, I'd like to begin the program with you. What do you make of the new ISF data on formalization of jobs?
Encouraging. The fact that we've been able to see 7 million people get formalized in a rough, approximately current base of 80 million, 16% of 500 million, it will be roughly 80 million, which means we've seen about 2.5% compounded rate, 2.5% compounded rate of formalization between 2015 and 2018. This is a good thing, as well as the projection which this report is showing that the 7 million could now become 11 million going forward between 2019 to 2021. And that whole lot of things have contributed towards it. The largest contribution coming from the threshold limits for contribution to the Employees Provident Fund, taking care of about 17%. And you know what had happened? The limit was lowered from the existing limit to 15,000 rupees. So more people got covered by the Employees Provident Fund.
So similarly, from 21,000, I think it was brought down to 15,000. Yeah.
And for ESIC, it was done the opposite. That from 15,000 raised to 21,000, so that a greater number of people have the benefit of ESIC scheme. That means the employers have to pay for, give their contribution. Of course, the fixed term contract you talked about, but also one other contributory factor was the flexi contract system. That has also contributed from about 1.1 million persons to about taking it to fairly large 4 million, but over a 9-year span. So roughly in every 3 years, about 1 million have come from that. And I would say going forward, good thing. And now that the ESIC and EPF contribution, you know, the ESIC in particular, sorry, that's been corrected a few days ago. It comes into force from 1st of July. That the contribution of the employers were earlier paying 4%.
Right.
Now they will be required to pay 3.25%. The employees who were earlier paying 2%, employees were paying 2.5%. Now they end up paying only 0.75, because the total is down from 6.5 to 4.
Right.
Which means that the discouragement of the employers that they will have to pay as much as 4%, now that being down by 3.25%, more money which actually belongs to the workers, will go to them.
Right.
Because when they are employed, it's a cost to the company
Absolutely,
concept.
absolutely.
And the both now, their own contribution will be less, as well as that. We could see faster movement towards formalization.
Right.
One thing I'll just like to say before I pass on. A major requirement or a characteristics of formal jobs is a legally enforceable job contract. That's what we really call as a formal job. That also leads you to an assured remuneration. It also gets you social contract, social security, and finally it gets that gives you more prestige.
Absolutely.
So
right.
those kind of things is what is meant really by a formal sector.
So certainly.
And going forward, I would see that happening at a much faster pace.
Absolutely. Aman Agarwal, since we are here, let's try and define now what formal employment is and also what can be categorized as formal work.
You see, mostly they have been, the definition came back way back in 1970, 71. And we could come to know what was informal, and then we defined the formal. But the formal typically meant wherever there was firstly government employment, secondly employment which could be categorized and notified, whether it is in the private sector through tax systems or through other social frameworks like the EPSO and so on and so forth. Now, whoever came into that net typically formed a part of the formal segment of a country, and the rest of the community, which was workforce, typically became the informal segment, because the government would not come to know whether they are earning or not earning, and if they are earning, how much are they earning, because there is no way to bring them to the books of the structure of employability. Now, this is where the formal and the informal typically start getting categorized, and it is important because the way GDP grows, the way we talk of productivity, we talk of growth of a country, depends on the kind of inputs which come in terms of contributions from the people at large, because ultimately the government gets revenue from the people through direct or indirect taxes. Now, if we do not know exactly how much are people getting employed, we will not be able to project the real scenario of what GDP is, and that's why if you go back in the history of GDP, we have been always looking at a GDP, even if we project a 7% or 8%, we would say the actual GDP is almost to the tune of double the level, because the parallel economy, which constituted largely the informal segment, also an illegal segment, but largely the informal segment, contributed to the GDP growth. So effectively we were around, if we said 7%, effectively about 10 or 12% of GDP which we are seeing in this country, because whoever was earning was actually going and buying products, good, food, services to go about, despite the fact that the government was not accounting for. I am happy that this report has come out where they have actually at least been able to identify some of the factors which have led to this shift of the informal sector into the formal sector, which included the GST, the demonetization and other. Two, in fact, in my opinion, apart from the report which you highlighted very well, are critical important which have not been given an emphasis. One is the startup framework which has been created by this government and has been the momentum from 2014 onwards. Not only through the Mudra schemes, whether it is for men or women or just startups, through the Startup India program. Apart from this, large number of frameworks have been created to push through incubator facilities to be set up at educational institutions, at research centers and various other places to build up the startup framework. The other component, which in my opinion also seems to be missed out, is in this current year budget which was presented in February. We saw that there was a proposition of about 5 lakh rupees, anyone earning till 5 lakh rupees to be completely exempt. So that was an exemption which was granted. So even if he filed a return to 5 lakh rupees, he does not need to pay any tax. Now that was not a tax rebate which was given in the minimum level of exemption, but it was a complete clear-cut tax break there. Now this is where large number of, in my opinion, which we calibrated at the institute, roughly about 60-65% of the population of this country gets into this framework of 5 lakh rupees, because a small manufacturer, a women entrepreneur which is selling from the home, actually can now take benefit of reporting their income, because most of them are less than 5 lakhs, and getting a tax return filed up, and as a result building on. Because what we have seen in various research studies around the world, whether it is World Bank or UN or other, is that to get most people in the informal sector into the tax bracket. GST did that, The demonetization did that, but we still not been able to. But this 5 lakh thing will certainly help, because if you want to take loan under the Mudra scheme, you want to take loan from banks or financial institutions, all of them want your income tax returns to be presented before. And most of these small vendors, whether it is making small sweaters or making small pickles or small things, which most women around this country are doing,
Right.
whether rural or urban, they have not been able to claim the benefits of these schemes,
Sure.
primarily because they never had the income tax return. Now with this 5 lakh scheme which has come up, a lot of people will be able to file returns, whether it is a small chaatwala or a samosewala, or these women coming from both rural and urban areas. They can then start claiming benefits and making their small businesses into large.
Sure.
Now that is something which is a big motivation, which I feel, these are 2 points which I feel the report seems to have left out, but
Right.
are key contributors going in the Modi 2.0 government, which will be given focus on.
Right.
And I think the third thing which we'll also see is there is the fact that this government is now focusing extensively on water, which is a key component area, not only from bottle layering or supplying. Water has become a very key component in large cities where small distributors have come out, started supplying clean water apart from big vendors which have been providing, and it is one of the key component in terms of reducing the cost of health burden and other diseases and malnutritions which come forth and become a big cost for the nation.
Sure.
And the largest society of this country, primarily the downtrodden, which get affected around the country.
Absolutely. All right. Yatish Rajawat, as far as some of the reasons why we've seen 7 million jobs come into the formal sector, Mr. Dua highlighted a few of them. He spoke about, of course, the ESIC, he spoke about EPF, he also spoke about, fixed term contract and flexi contract as well. Let's talk about the role of demonetization and GST now, because they have contributed to about more than 2 million. How has formalization happened as a result of GST and demonetization?
So first of all, we must understand that this is not creation of new jobs.
Yeah.
This is formalization of existing jobs. And the reason they came into being into the formal economy is one, that the transactions which used to exist outside the system have come inside the system, and GST has been the biggest driver for that, because every vendor who's paid anything can only get input credit if he's registered as a GST number, and because he registered as a GST number, his organization has to register. So both an individual entrepreneur and his company have come into the GST fold. So if you look at GST's numbers, most of the payments and the transactions are individual based, they are not large organization based. So everybody who is coming to the fold has to then necessarily also record their own employees into formal, because then only they can take the benefit of that input. This has led to formalization of the employee, even for a samosa wala or a the chai wala who is supplying to a canteen or is supplying any other material to a large corporate. And there are typically the multiple is that if there is one person working in an office, then there are at least 2 or 3 people in the support environment who is helping that white collar worker, and these are blue collar workers. There could be a pantry guy, this could be a cleaning guy, this could be a electrician. They used to exist outside the system because the system did not encourage their formal jobs. One, because once you make a person formal, there are labor laws which you need to meet. Secondly, there were the mandatory requirement of both EPF and ESIC, which has been brought down by this government. So that's a plus step. But the bigger challenge, and which still remains, and which is more so in the manufacturing sector, where temporary employees continue to exist. And we've seen regularly over the last couple of years that these temporary employees are the one which get affected whenever there is a small downturn, like it is taking place both in the two-wheeler industry and in the automobile industry, where these temp workers are high and they still not come into so-called formal economy, because they're hired for 180 days and then they're let go, or they're rehired back into the system. So there is another set of reform that is needed there. Now these are all what I call as nudge reforms, in the sense that they have nudged the organization or corporates to follow a particular system, because that system is good both for the employee and the employer. The objective of GST or the objective of demonetization was not this, but it has nudged a particular behavior and it has resulted into formalization. Now, how do you take this formalization as a system forward? Now you need to do things certainly which will encourage, like for instance, employment. And I believe that the current focus on startups is slightly misdirected and misrepresented, because most startups, especially the ones who are getting funded, are all in the technology space.
Right.
They do not generate the kind of jobs that the country needs. They
Sure.
only generate white collar jobs, and that too, these are replacement jobs. For instance, if a job is created in e-commerce, it basically takes away jobs from the small entrepreneur, shopkeeper, or from the organized retail industry. It does not create a separate job. If it creates a delivery job, it has taken away certain jobs and then replaced them.
Brick and mortar stores is what
Yes.
you're suggesting.
So,
Okay.
I mean, fundamentally, they have to be looked from that point of view.
Right.
We should not over rely on these sectors to create it.
Okay, we'll talk about what more needs to be done really as far as bringing the 84% of informal sector into the formal economy ahead in the program. But before that, Mr. Dua, very quickly, what are the benefits really of formalization of the workforce?
2 or 3. The biggest of it is that the worker gets assured terms of his employment. He knows for how long he is employed and what are his terms and conditions of employment, how much leave, how much salary, what scale of pay, etc. He also knows that he has a social protection, because if it is social, he's coming within the threshold limits of ESIC and others, those benefits come to him. Plus, he has this benefit of being able to work out his for how long he wants to remain, etc. All certainty about employment brings in a lot of emotional security as well as productivity gain. Second, I think the government benefits, because how many people can be covered by taxation, income to the government. The employer benefits, because employer also knows who is the person who is going to be coming to work.
Right.
Today, contract labor, which we are seeing growing much faster in the industry, which was Jatish just mentioned about the automobile in particular, after 180 days that worker is shifted out. If he remains in the same company, then he gets benefit of a regular employment. So it's a contractor, he brings an able-bodied man, but whether it's the same guy, X or Y, is not sure, because his contract is to supply you 200 persons for 180
Right.
days, the person gets more.
So the number remains the same, but the phase changes.
The phase changes, so the productivity gain changes. But it may be benefit because you are giving a lump sum salary.
Right.
You're not giving him increments, etc. to the employer. But I think it's a myopic view of things. The productivity of labor, which is most important for the worker, that's not for the employer. That doesn't come about in the current scheme of things.
Right.
That is where I think labor reforms
Sure.
become extremely important, and where it is being talked about that if you do not bring in hire and fire policy, it could have any kinds of variations. Fixed term contract which started with textile and garments, then extended to other industries, is one such variation.
Right.
You need to have revisit your labor laws, not to harm the labor, but actually in the medium term benefiting them, empower them, and the employers then will be much less reluctant
Sure.
to take on more workers on a regular basis than they are today.
Sure. Sure. Aman Agarwal, this issue of labor reforms, we have the 4 labor codes, but they've not been able to progress to the extent that we would like them to. How important are labor reforms? Because as we see more formalization, labor reforms is key, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but it's more of a chicken and hen situation which always goes on, because the question of the industry surviving and then they finding a way out of the whole scenario has always been there, not only in this country but even internationally. One of the interesting ways which some of the countries have done is that they have given job orientation or job increase incentives to employers. So if they give more jobs, if they formalize more jobs, and as a result they get certain tax breaks and benefits, which I think the government should start considering to do when it comes to industries. Because job is something which is certainly, jobs and employment is something which is a key concern for this government even in the previous term and even today, to bring up that productivity for going forward. Now that's where I feel it's not, labor laws will settle off. It's not an easy task. I think it's been debated for good 50-60 years. Still it's under debate. What will happen, what will not happen, it's a big debate. I know Indian administrative reforms were supposed to be introduced way back in 99 or so, but still today the Indian administrative reforms have not come into place. So if at the white collar level we are not able to do, and these contract structures which are being proposed, I know in University of Delhi, where teachers are hired for a certain period and relieved, and again these are white collar jobs again. Now if that is happening, so the contracts get defined according to what the market is ready to offer. What the government needs to see is that how do we see increase in jobs, how do we see increase both jobs in the informal segment, people coming from the informal to the formal segment, even white collar or labor, irrespective of that. The issue is that if there are specific incentives, tax incentives which are given to the employers, why would they not want to do? GST, in a matter which you raised, critically helped do that, because earlier we would see the houses, bungalows of these industrialists, small or large, building up and becoming big, but the firms will remain small,
right,
because they will actually eat away the money, because they had to pay cash, and they would pay cash to the laborer, and then they will go off, take away all the money, not to show to the tax authorities and not to pay taxes. Today, because they have to file GST, now they have to show structures and they have to show that productivity coming in. If they are doing that, they will need to show a certain amount of labor. Now that labor gets this money, and as a result the standard of living of the labor goes up. They can take loans from banks for education of their children, they can take loans from banks for the housing, and these are some things which indirectly have benefited as a result of GST. So it is a win-win situation both for the employer, and we will now see businesses becoming bigger as against houses becoming bigger, which was the case in this country before.
Sure.
And this is where I feel it's important that sufficient initiatives and incentives are given to the industrialists, giving them due respect, not putting shackles. It has been seen that we need to have rules and regulations, but if these rules and regulations are throttling any industry, industries will move out of that segment.
Right.
And that's who are the ones, when we are talking of the government wanting not the government to take over,
give them enough
space to breathe and flourish.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to come back to the point that you were making earlier, Yatish, as to what are the real challenges of bringing the informal sector into the formal economy.
So, I mean, clearly there are big issues like where do you want the sector to lie? Earlier there was this thinking that some sector needs to be reserved for the small and medium enterprises, and they were basically because small entrepreneurs play in those areas, so therefore large industries were not allowed into that space, like garment manufacturing or handicrafts, and so there are sectors which have been reserved and have been typically been part of the so-called SSI area. But then there is a challenge which the industry keeps pointing out, which is labor reforms, which is again a misnomer of sort, because Rajasthan did the labor reform. It allowed that hire and fire policy even for employers who had less than 25 employees. But after 4 years of that policy being passed, it did not result into higher industrial activity or to investment per se. So it is just not the labor reform part of it which will activate this thing. And to Aman's point, and it's a very important distinction that we now need to make between capital investment and job creation, because that linkage is broken. I may make a capital investment of $100 million, but if $80 million of that investment is going to buy land, then and only $20 million is going into capital equipment or the factory, then basically $20 million is what is productive and where the employees will, future employees will come. So therefore, world over, incentives are not given according to the amount or value of your investment. It is based on the number of jobs that you will directly create and number of jobs that you indirectly help. That's the rule which is followed by all government, state, province or whatever, whether you go to China or you go to Europe. Here we have followed the reverse. We have always been blindsided by the fact that a company is coming in and saying that we are going to put $1 billion here. But that $1 billion does not result even in 100 jobs because everything in that shop floor is automated. And this is the bigger challenge. The bigger challenge of job creation is not just at entry level, particularly in blue collar workers. It is about reskilling.
Right.
And here again, we need to understand that all our skilling efforts till date has been at the entry level. They have not been at the mid level. Somebody who's already, like for example, take the auto industry. We see a massive disruption happening in the auto industry because of electric vehicles. Now suddenly you have the internal combustion engine going out of the market, which would mean that a whole ecosystem of service people, repair guys, your roadside repair guys.
They either lose their job or they have to be
Yes.
reskilled.
Yes. So they have to be reskilled, but they're not entry level people. They already have a skill.
Right.
And they are in the age group of 35 to 45. So how do you now create a new set of people who will be able to service these guys? And this cannot be done at industry level.
Right.
This has to be done at government and institutional level.
Sure.
So this is when disruptions happen, you need to change, you need to be flexible to accept, adapt and build ecosystems around it.
Right. Okay. 3 minutes left on the program. Quick closing comments from all my panelists on the best way forward, starting first with you, Mr. Dua.
I think let's be very clear that there are certainly benefits of formalizing the economy. We cannot go on with unguaranteed terms of contract for labor who's always kept in the dark whether he'll be required to come tomorrow or not, and is uncertain about how much he will get, and continue to keep him away from the umbrella of social protection.
Right.
I have absolutely no qualms about saying that these are basic requirements. Everything else has to be played around it.
Sure.
Whether it is a disruption in a technology related issue, whether it's a question of small versus large, the basic requirement of development or progress is how well you are taking care of a set of people who
Of your workforce at the end of the day.
add to value in the economy.
Absolutely. Aman Agarwal?
I think 3 crisp points which I would like to make here. One is that the government needs to focus on agriculture. Agriculture still houses a large component of this informal workforce, which needs to be given due credit, and there are ways of doing it, and that will help induce extensive productivity for agriculture and respect for the agriculturists. The second component is the employability. I think we suggested something called the National Labour Exchange in 2016, which the Ministry of Labour is looking at the Institute, and I think that model needs to be taken up more of an exchange where we talk about wealth creation. The third component is the Aadhaar which has been created. Aadhaar can be a great enabler to actually come to know about the workforce which is existing in this country,
sure,
which they have not still done. So we've done some work on this as well, and which is to actually bring up and link up the productivity and the component factor which is contributing to the economy through the Aadhaar, which is already distributed. We still have almost 191 million people, 19 crore people, which are still not connected with the banks and the financial.
Right.
I think the government needs to work on that in terms of including the financial inclusion further and bringing prosperity and livelihood for everybody.
Sure. Yatish Rajawat, close the show with your concluding remarks.
So, first thing, skilling needs to move beyond age groups. It needs to cater to both services jobs and not just blue collar worker. Second is credit flow. We've seen the success of Mudra, but Mudra's success has been limited to single entrepreneurship individuals. It's not scaled up to a corporate level or somebody who can actually create 20, 30 or 40 manpower outfit. So Mudra needs to scale up. Secondly, so credit flow to this segment has to be created, and it cannot be, what we have learned is that irrespective of how much we force the banks and try to bring down interest rate, the transmission of both credit and delivery does not take place.
Right.
When interest rate does not fall for them and they do not get the credit. So both these things now therefore has to be housed in a different institution which can do this.
Sure.
And this is immediately required.
Okay, all right. On that note then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.